snapped to the side, my lace veil snagging on my diamond earring. "Ethan, get out. Now, not until you tell these people the truth. Bernice, tell them you're mine." I clutched my bouquet so hard the stems snapped. The guests, the cream of society, the politicians, the power brokers, sat like statues in the pews. No one breathed, no one moved. They watched the man I used to love tower over me at the altar I'd spent a year building toward. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot, his silk tie crooked. He looked like a man who had lost his mind, but he felt like the only person in the room with any power. I looked for my bridesmaids, they were staring at their shoes. I looked for the priest, he was pale, backed into the stone corner. That's when I felt the temperature drop. Across the altar, standing by the heavy oak chairs, was Minseok Choi, my husband-to-be. He didn't look shocked, he didn't look angry. He looked like a scientist, watching an insect crawl onto the wrong leaf. His dark eyes moved from the red mark on my cheek to Ethan's trembling hand. He didn't reach for me, he didn't shout. He just set his ceremonial glass down on the marble with a soft clink. Then he took a step forward, no rush, just a surgical, terrifying calm. And as the room held its collective breath, Minseok's hand moved to the top button of his tailored black jacket. He unbuttoned it once. The silence became deafening. "Who are you supposed to be? Some bodyguard?" Ethan's voice cracked. He saw the shift in the air, but his pride wouldn't let him run. Only one person in that cathedral knew that when Minseok Choi unbuttons his jacket, a life is about to change forever. If you want to see what happens when the quietest man in the room finally speaks, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments. You won't want to miss the fallout. The jacket fell open, and the world seemed to tilt. The movement was so fluid, so deliberate, that even the air in the cathedral felt like it had been sucked out of the room. Ethan froze. His hand, still raised from the momentum of the strike, began to tremble. He looked down at Minseok's chest, then back up at his eyes, and the blood drained from his face until he was the color of the white lilies lining the pews. Minseok didn't move toward him with aggression. He moved with the slow, inevitable weight of a mountain. He closed the distance between them until he was standing inches from Ethan's face. He was taller, broader, and radiated a coldness that made the summer afternoon feel like the dead of winter. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched Minseok lean in. He didn't look at me. His focus was entirely on the man who had dared to touch me. He leaned toward Ethan's ear, his lips barely moving. The rest of the room was a vacuum of silence, but I was close enough to catch the low, vibrating rasp of his voice. "I have spent 34 years learning how to erase things that offend me." Minseok whispered, "By the time you reach the parking lot, your bank accounts will be empty, your reputation will be a memory, and I will be deciding whether you are worth the paperwork it takes to make you disappear. Run while I'm still feeling lazy." Ethan's eyes went wide. For a second, he looked like he wanted to scream, to maintain the facade of the powerful, jilted lover, but whatever he saw in Minseok's gaze was a death sentence. It wasn't rage, it was a total lack of humanity. Ethan stumbled back, his polished shoes scuffing loudly against the marble. He looked at the guests, but no one, not even the people who had done business with his father for decades, would meet his eye. He was already a ghost. Without a single word, Ethan turned and bolted. He didn't just walk. He ran, his heavy footsteps echoing down the long aisle and out through the massive oak doors, leaving nothing but the swinging shadows behind. The silence remained. Minseok didn't turn to the crowd to explain. He didn't apologize for the scene. He simply turned to me, his hand, steady and warm, reached out and gently cupped the side of my face, where the sting was already turning into a dull throb. His thumb traced my jawline, with a tenderness that felt almost more dangerous than his threats. "You're shaking," he noted quietly. His eyes searched mine, looking for the steel he knew I had. "Don't, the trash has been taken out. We have a ceremony to finish." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't just safe, I was claimed. The wedding didn't end with a celebration. It ended with a transition. I didn't throw a bouquet, and there was no slow dance under a shower of petals. Instead, I found myself tucked into the back of a black sedan, with windows so thick the city outside looked like a silent movie. Minseok sat beside me, his jacket buttoned once more, his hands resting perfectly still on his knees. He didn't speak, but the weight of his presence was a physical thing, a shield that felt increasingly like a boundary. We drove for nearly 40 minutes, leaving the familiar skyline of the city behind for the winding, shadowed roads of the hills. When we finally slowed, it wasn't for a driveway, but a checkpoint. A massive iron gate stood guarded by 4 men in tactical gear. They didn't look like bouncers or hired help. They stood with a rigid military discipline that made my breath hitch. They didn't ask for ID, they simply looked at the car, tapped their earpieces, and the gates groaned open. "Where are we, Minseok?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the plush interior. "Home," he replied, "or as close to it as you'll get for a while." As the car wound up the private drive, the home he described revealed itself. It was a fortress of glass and slate, perched on the edge of a cliff. But it wasn't the architecture that stole my breath, it was the perimeter. Every 50 yards, a man was stationed. Some were in suits, others in dark fatigues, but they all shared the same unsettling stillness. I saw the glint of lenses from the tree line, security cameras that moved with the precision of a predator's eyes. The car stopped in an underground garage that looked more like a command center. As the door was opened for me, I stepped out onto polished concrete, my wedding dress feeling heavy and absurd in such a clinical environment. A man with a scarred brow stepped forward, bowing deeply to Minseok before shifting his gaze to me. "Everything is secure, Mr. Choi. The perimeter is doubled for the night," the man said. "This is Bernice," Minseok said, his voice echoing, "Her word is mine. Her safety is the only priority. If a bird flies over this fence without a tag, I want to know about it." I looked around the vast space, realizing that this wasn't just a house with a few bodyguards. It was a private jurisdiction. Ethan had spent years making me feel like I was being watched, but that had been the stalking of a coward. This was different. This was an army. I turned to Minseok, my heart thumping against the lace of my bodice. "Is all of this for Ethan?" I whispered. Minseok looked at me, his expression unreadable as he guided me toward the elevator. "Ethan was the spark, Bernice. But now that you're a Choi, the world looks at you differently. I don't just protect what I own, I defend it." The elevator doors slid shut, and as we rose toward the penthouse, I realized the stability I had sought was wrapped in layers of steel I wasn't sure I could ever peel back. The penthouse was a cathedral of glass and shadows, silent save for the hum of the climate control. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights of the city below looking like fallen stars. I had finally shed the heavy layers of my wedding dress, now wrapped in a silk robe that felt far too light for the cold reality settling in my chest. Minseok was at a minimalist desk, his laptop casting a pale blue glow over his sharp features. He didn't look like a man on his wedding night. He looked like a general reviewing a casualty list. Without looking up, he gestured to a leather folder resting on the coffee table. "Open it," he said. His voice was a low, even vibration. I hesitated, then pulled the ribbon. Inside were bank statements, legal filings, and a series of encrypted messages printed on heavy paper. My eyes blurred as I scanned the names: Caldwell Holdings, Liquidated Assets, Chapter 11 filings. Ethan's family has been a hollow shell for 18 months. Minseok stated, finally closing his laptop and standing. He walked toward me, his movements fluid and predatory. The charm, the galas, the polished suits, it was all funded by debt he couldn't pay. He didn't just lose you because of his temper, Bernice, he lost the ability to afford the life he promised you. I knew they were struggling. I whispered, my fingers trembling against the paper. But he told me it was a temporary dip. It was a free fall. Minseok stopped a foot away, the scent of sandalwood and expensive ink surrounding him. And when the lenders came to collect, Ethan offered them the only thing he had left that they valued: your access. I looked up confused. My access? You spent 3 years as the senior analyst for the city's largest infrastructure firm. You know the bidding codes, the private equity vulnerabilities, and the personal dirt on every board member in the district. Minseok's eyes turned stone cold. Ethan didn't crash our wedding out of love. He crashed it because he had already signed a contract to deliver your digital keys and your testimony to my rivals. You were the collateral he used to buy his family another 6 months of pretending to be rich. The floor felt like it was dissolving beneath my feet. Ethan hadn't been trying to win me back. He had been trying to repossess an asset. He had looked me in the eye and slapped me, not in a fit of passion, but as a display of dominance for the people he'd sold me to. He tried to sell my life, I breathed, the steel in my spine finally beginning to harden. He did sell it, Minseok corrected, reaching out to tilt my chin up so I had to meet his gaze. But he forgot one thing: I don't let others trade in what belongs to the Choi family. I bought the debt, Bernice, and now I own the contract. The folder sat like a lead weight on my lap. I had spent years believing Ethan was a man of substance, only to find out I was the currency he intended to use to fill his empty pockets. The betrayal didn't just hurt. It felt like a cold, sharp blade being twisted in my ribs. Minseok didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell me it would be okay. Instead, he walked back to his desk and picked up a sleek, encrypted phone. "Watch," he said simply. "This is how the world actually turns." He dialed a number and put it on speaker. The dial tone was brief, clipped. A man answered on the second ring, his voice thick with the practiced confidence of a CFO. "Minseok, I assume this is about the Caldwell merger. We're ready to sign." "Change of plans, Arthur," Minseok said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man reading a grocery list. "I've just authorized the release of the forensic audit I conducted on the Caldwell offshore accounts. The ones Ethan used to hide the bankruptcy filings. You'll find the link in your secure inbox now." There was a frantic clicking of keys on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. If this goes public, their stock won't just drop. It'll be delisted by morning. They're insolvent. "It's already public," Minseok replied, glancing at his watch. "I sent it to the regulatory board and the press 5 seconds before I called you. Now pull your capital, all of it. If you're still associated with a Caldwell by midnight, I'll consider you an accomplice to their fraud." "I understand," the voice said. Now trembling, "Consider it done." Minseok ended the call and turned his gaze back to me. That was the final pillar. Ethan's father built that company on a foundation of lies, and Ethan thought he could use you to prop it up. Now, there is nothing left to hold them up. I watched him, mesmerized by the absolute lack of hesitation. There was no shouting, no physical brawl, just a few sentences and a digital execution. He had dismantled a multi-generational empire while barely breaking a sweat. It was surgical, it was bloodless, and it was terrifying. "He'll have nothing," I whispered, the realization sinking in. No money, no name, no protection. He chose to play a game he didn't understand. Minseok said, stepping closer until he stood directly over me. He reached down, his fingers brushing the hair away from my face. "He saw you as a prize to be traded. I see you as a partner to be defended. Do you see the difference now, Burness?" I looked into his dark, calculating eyes and felt a new kind of heat rising in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't the one being dismantled. For the first time, I was on the side of the person holding the knife. The penthouse felt larger in the wake of Minseok's cold efficiency, the silence echoing the destruction he had just unleashed with a single phone call. I sat on the edge of the oversized velvet sofa, my hands finally beginning to lose their tremors. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache in my jaw where Ethan's ring had caught skin. Minseok moved toward me, discarding his silk tie on the way. He disappeared into the sprawling marble bathroom and returned moments later with a small basin of warm water and a soft cloth. He didn't ask for permission. He simply knelt between my knees, forcing me to look at him. "Hold still," he murmured. The water was warm, but his touch was even warmer. He dabbed the cloth against my cheek with a precision that bordered on the medical. His eyes weren't on mine. They were locked onto the faint, blossoming bruise on my deep brown skin. He studied the mark the way he studied his ledgers, identifying a deficit that needed to be balanced. "The swelling is minimal," he noted, his voice dropping to a low, territorial hum. "But it shouldn't be there at all." He set the cloth aside and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, gold-capped jar. He dipped a finger into the cool salve and began to massage it into my skin. His touch was incredibly light, yet the air between us felt heavy, charged with a strange, dark electricity. "You're very quiet, Burness," he said, his eyes finally lifting to meet mine. They were dark, observant, and entirely focused. "I'm trying to figure out if you're protecting me because you care, or because I'm part of your inventory now," I said, the steel in my spine vibrating with the honesty of the question. Minseok's hand paused on my face. He didn't pull away. Instead, he slid his fingers back, burying them in the hair at the nape of my neck. It wasn't a violent grip, but it was absolute. It was the grip of a man who didn't know how to let go of what he had claimed. "Care is a word for people who have nothing to lose," he whispered, leaning closer until I could feel the heat radiating from him. "I don't care for things, Burness. I curate them, I defend them, and I destroy anything that thinks it has the right to touch them without my consent." He leaned in, his lips brushing the space just beside the bruise, a ghost of a kiss that felt like a brand. "Ethan Caldwell didn't just hit a woman. He breathed against my skin. He damaged something that bears the Choi name. He will live long enough to realize that was the last mistake he will ever be allowed to make." In that moment, I realized the danger hadn't passed. It had simply changed shape. I wasn't just safe. I was cherished with a ferocity that made my heart race for entirely new reasons. The peace of the estate shattered at 3 in the morning. It wasn't a loud explosion or the sound of gunfire. It was the sharp, rhythmic pulse of a silent alarm vibrating through the smart glass of the bedroom windows. The ambient lighting in the room shifted to a low, warning amber. Min-seok was awake before I could even draw a breath. He didn't scramble. He rolled out of bed with a controlled, lethal grace, already reaching for the phone on the nightstand. I sat up, clutching the silk sheets to my chest, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Stay in the center of the room," Min-seok commanded. His voice was a calm blade cutting through the tension. "Do not go near the glass." He pulled a tablet from the drawer, the screen flickering to life, with dozens of thermal camera feeds. I crept toward him, unable to stay away. On the screen, a lone figure was staggering through the manicured gardens, tripping over the low boxwood hedges. It was Ethan. He looked disheveled, his wedding tuxedo torn, his movements erratic with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. He was shouting, though the soundproofing of the penthouse muffled his cries into a ghost of a noise. "He bypassed the main gate," Min-seok murmured, his eyes scanning the data. "He climbed the drainage ravine, reckless, suicidal." "Min-seok, don't let them," I started, the image of the armed guards at the perimeter flashing in my mind. "I told them to hold," he intercepted, his thumb sliding over the screen to zoom in on Ethan's face. "I want him to see what he's trying to challenge." We watched as Ethan reached the terrace directly below us. He looked up, his face twisted in a mask of agony and rage. He was waving a heavy object, a brick or a bottle, aiming it at the reinforced glass. Behind him, 4 of Min-seok's security team materialized from the shadows like specters. They didn't draw weapons, they simply surrounded him, forming a wall of silent, immovable muscle. Min-seok stood up and walked toward the window. Stepping into the amber light, he looked down at the man who had tried to sell me, his expression one of profound boredom. He tapped a button on the wall, and the external speakers activated. "Ethan," Min-seok's voice boomed across the terrace, stripped of all emotion, "you are trespassing on a sovereign estate. You have no money left to bribe your way out, and no name left to protect you from the consequences. Look around you." Ethan spun in a circle, realization finally dawning, as he saw the sheer scale of the force surrounding him. He looked like a child trying to fight a storm. He dropped the object in his hand, his knees buckling. "I'm not finished," Ethan screamed, his voice cracking. "She's mine." Min-seok leaned closer to the glass, his eyes dark and unwavering. "She was never yours, you just had her on loan, and you defaulted on the payment. Now you leave on your feet, or you leave in a van. The choice is the only thing you have left." I watched Ethan from the height of the penthouse, a broken figure, illuminated by the harsh security lights of the terrace. For months, the mere thought of his voice had made my skin crawl. His shadow had been a cage I carried with me everywhere. But seeing him now, surrounded by Min-seok's silent, professional wall of steel, the monster I had feared looked pathetic, small. "I want to go down," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. Min-seok turned, his gaze searching mine for a flicker of hesitation. "You don't have to face him, Bernice. I can have him removed and erased from your sight forever." "I know I don't have to," I replied, stepping toward the elevator. "That's why I need to do it." Min-seok nodded once, a gesture of silent respect, and followed me. When the elevator doors opened onto the terrace, the night air was crisp, carrying the scent of ozone and dampened stone. Ethan was on his knees, panting, his eyes darting between the guards. When he saw me, a flash of his old, delusional confidence returned. "Bernice," he gasped, trying to stand. One of the guards placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, rooting him to the spot. "Tell this monster that you're coming with me. We can fix this. My father just needs a little time to." "Your father has nothing, Ethan," I interrupted. I walked forward until I was standing just out of his reach. I didn't hide behind Min-seok. I stood on my own, my robe fluttering in the breeze. "And you have even less." "I did it for us," he hissed, his face contorting. "I was trying to save our future." I looked down at him, and I didn't feel the familiar cold prickle of terror. I didn't feel the urge to apologize or shrink. I felt a profound, liberating sense of boredom. "You didn't try to save us, you tried to sell me. You viewed my life as a line item on a balance sheet you couldn't balance." I took a step closer, leaning down so I could see the cowardice hiding behind his rage. "The only reason you're still breathing right now is because Min-seok Choi values my peace more than your disappearance. You spent years telling me I was nothing without you, but look at us now. I gestured to the sprawling fortress, the army in the shadows, and the man standing behind me. A man who didn't need to raise his hand to command the world. I am not afraid of you, Ethan. I'm not even angry anymore. You're just a debt that's finally been settled. Ethan reached out, a desperate, clawing motion, but he froze when he heard the sound of a single button clicking open. Min-seok had moved just a fraction of an inch, his hand resting on the edge of his jacket. The warning was silent, but it was absolute. Ethan's hand dropped, he looked at me, then at the power radiating from the man at my back. And finally he broke, he slumped forward, the last of his pride dissolving into the dirt. I turned my back on him, walking toward Min-seok. I didn't look back, I didn't need to. The morning sun crept over the horizon, but it brought no warmth for the Caldwell family. We were back in the penthouse, the air tasting of espresso and the cold, metallic scent of a world being realigned. Min-seok sat at the dining table, a tablet propped open before him. He was dressed in a fresh suit, his presence as composed as a portrait, while Ethan sat slumped in a chair across from him, guarded by two men who hadn't blinked in 3 hours. I've spent the night reviewing your father's ledgers, Min-seok said, his voice as quiet as the dawn. It's impressive, in a way, the layering of the shell companies, the falsified invoices for the infrastructure bids. It took my team nearly 6 hours to find the digital thread that ties it all back to your personal signature. Ethan looked up, his eyes hollow. What do you want? I want nothing from you, Min-seok replied. He turned the tablet around. On the screen was a live feed of the Caldwell corporate headquarters. 4 black SUVs had pulled up to the curb, and men in windbreakers with federal investigation, printed across the back, were streaming through the glass doors. Your father is being arrested as we speak. And because you were the one who signed off on the last 3 quarterly reports, the ones you intended to use to leverage Burness's secrets, you are an accessory to racketeering and securities fraud. Ethan's jaw dropped. You tipped them off. I provided the evidence they couldn't find. Min-seok corrected. I don't play in the dirt. Ethan, I simply illuminate it. He tapped a final key on his keyboard. A digital chime echoed through the room, the sound of a life ending. I've also transferred the records of your attempted sale of proprietary infrastructure codes. That's a national security concern. You won't be going to a comfortable white-collar facility. You'll be going somewhere where your name means absolutely nothing. 2 uniformed officers entered the penthouse. Led by Juan, they didn't look at the luxury or the view. They looked only at Ethan. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the sound was final, a sharp, metallic period at the end of a long, dark sentence. Ethan tried to look at me one last time, perhaps searching for a shred of the girl who used to apologize for his temper. But I didn't turn away, and I didn't look down. I stood beside Min-seok, my hand resting on the back of his chair, watching the authorities lead Ethan out. Is it over? I asked when the elevator doors finally closed. Min-seok stood up, his gaze softening as it landed on me. He reached out, his fingers tracing the faint line where the bruise had already begun to fade. The threat is gone, Burness. He will spend the rest of his life answering for his choices. You are no longer collateral, you are free. I looked out at the city, realizing that Min-seok hadn't just defeated my enemy. He had dismantled the very system Ethan used to trap me. The checkmate was complete. The gala was held in the same grand hall where, only weeks ago, the air had been thick with the scent of lilies and the bitter taste of humiliation. But tonight, the atmosphere was different. The high ceilings and marble floors didn't feel like a cage. They felt like a stage. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, draped in a gown of midnight silk that shimmered like oil on water. Beside me, Min-seok was a shadow-given form, immaculate, silent and devastatingly poised. He didn't need to hold my hand to claim me. The way he stood, his body angled slightly toward mine, told the room everything they needed to know. As we descended, the frantic chatter of the city's elite died down to a respectful hum. These were the same people who had watched Ethan strike me and looked away. Now they stood like statues, their eyes darting between my composed face and the man who had burned an empire to the ground to keep me. Min-seok led me to the center of the floor. He didn't offer a speech. He didn't explain the sudden disappearance of the Caldwells or the shifting tides of the local economy. He simply leaned in, his voice a low vibration that only I could hear. They are waiting for you to flinch. He murmured, his dark eyes searching mine. Are you going to? Never again, I replied, the steel in my spine finally forged and tempered. A prominent investor, a man who had once laughed at Ethan's possessiveness, approached us with a trembling glass of champagne. Mr. Choi, Mrs. Choi, a stunning evening. We were also concerned after the wedding incident. Min Seok's gaze shifted to the man, his hand moving habitually to the top button of his jacket. The investor's breath hitched, his face paling by several shades. Before Min Seok could speak, I stepped forward, my voice clear and quietly commanding. Concern is appreciated, George, I said, meeting the man's eyes until he looked away. But unnecessary. The Choi family doesn't dwell on the past. We simply ensure it doesn't repeat itself. Min Seok's lips quirked into the rarest of things, a genuine, albeit sharp, smile. He placed his hand on the small of my back, a gesture that felt less like protection and more like a pact. The music began, a slow, sweeping orchestral piece that filled the hollow spaces of the hall. As we moved together, the crowd parted like a dark sea. I wasn't the girl who had arrived at the altar, in a shroud of lace and fear. I was a woman who had walked through the fire and found her own flame. I looked up at Min Seok, seeing the strategist, the protector, and the man who had recognized my resilience when everyone else saw only compliance. I wasn't a survivor of a story anymore. I was the one writing the next chapter. You look satisfied, Min Seok noted as the dance drew to a close. I am, I whispered. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Thank you so much for standing with Bernice and Min Seok through this intense journey of resilience, calculation, and a love that redefined what it means to be safe. If this story reminded you that true strength doesn't always have to shout, that the right partner doesn't try to shrink your world, but builds a fortress to protect it, and that some debts can only be paid with total transformation, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to AfroKorean Grit Story for more cinematic tales of love that stands its ground and justice that never misses its mark. What did you think about Bernice's transition from a survivor to a partner in Min Seok's world? Did Ethan Caldwell get the ending he deserved, or was his downfall too clinical? And what about the others in that room? Do you think the elite will finally learn that the Choi family is not to be trifled with? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm always inspired by your take on these high-stakes moments. Until next time, remember that the right person won't ask you to hide your scars. They'll give you the power to ensure you never get another one. Keep believing that silence can be the most powerful weapon in the room. And keep believing that even when life tries to sell you short, you have the right to choose who holds the keys to your future. This is AfroKorean Grit Story, where love is a strategy, protection is a promise, and every ending is a new foundation. I'll see you in the next story.